Sorry about the distraction. There was actually some people talking outside of my door pretty loud. So just kind of picking up where I left off from again. Legislation legislation in many European countries has prevented wearing the burqa in public places. In addition to this, though, we see legislation passed in 2016 in Slovakia that actually banned Islam from being registered as an official religion. Um, Again, this coming from an article from the Sunday Express in Great Britain. Beyond this, many prominent political figures throughout Europe have kind of openly voiced their Islamophobic agenda to their constituents. All this stemming from the issue of Islamification. So, Islamification is essentially just the mass migration of Muslims into various European countries. This has sparked, in addition to the legislation I've already discussed, legislation that's an effort to halt the Muslim immigration into Europe. Though the irony in this is that majority of Muslim immigration throughout Europe stems from these European-born Muslims who are essentially just immigrating from Eastern and transcontinental Europe into Western and Central and the rest of Europe. So, as I mentioned before, Islamification has kind of presented a lot of the issues surrounding Muslims and why they're viewed the way they are in Europe. But in addition to this, there's the role that radical Islam has played. So, radical Islam is essentially the jihadist effort, jihadist being the kind of holy warrior for the State of Islam. But radical Islam is the very small population of the Muslim community that's has an extremist interpretation of their faith, meaning that they are kind of see themselves again as these jihadists, these holy warriors for their faith. Jihad is the Arabic word for striving and struggling, and actually appears in the Quran many times with no military connotation, whereas this jihadist term stems from the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks in the United States. These jihadist groups covered in the media and have really tainted the public image of just the general population when, again, they constitute a fraction of the world's population. I actually have a statistic here regarding ISIS, which is, again, garnering a lot of attention in the media, negative public attention. So the estimated population of ISIS today is around 150,000 participants, whereas there are 1.6 billion Muslims on Earth. So this translates into less than 0.1% of the global Muslim population being these radical Islamic terrorists that are kind of representing the whole Muslim community, which is pretty unfortunate. Kind of expanding on ISIS. So ISIS is the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And again, this is another jihadist radical Islamic group that has, because of its terrorist acts in Europe and abroad, has really garnered negative media attention and transformed the public image of Muslims, continuously making it worse, especially in Europe and the United States. The issue of Islam and Muslims in the media is that the media coverage fails to distinguish between, again, as we mentioned before, radical Islamists, foreign-born versus European-born Islamists, and the other distinctions of the Muslim people. They are essentially perceived and presented as this single demographic, this single violent religion that is perpetrating heinous acts throughout Europe. And yes, so kind of to conclude, a lot of the hatred that we see amongst Europe is stemming from this Islamification and from the radical Islamic groups that are, without a doubt, horrible groups perpetrating awful acts throughout Europe and throughout the world. But it's, again, stemming from the kind of misunderstanding of what Islam truly is, what Muslims truly are, who they truly are, and what it is that they truly represent, as opposed to what these single kind of minority groups of the Muslim community represent. Another one of these kind of misunderstandings is that of Sharia law. So Sharia law is essentially the kind of old world religious backed law within the Muslim faith. Uh, Very outdated, very non representative of modern Muslims, though it's in small pockets of the Muslim population still practice. Um, Again, it's just kind of it just kind of represents the misinterpretation of Islam. Yes, and one thing I figured I'd kind of conclude with is discussing what can be done to fix the negative image that's been created of Muslims in Europe. Education really is kind of the primary tool that can be used in kind of eliminating this. If we understand what Muslim represents, if we understand how small this population of violent Islamic terrorists are, I really feel that our kind of hostility towards Muslims, especially in Europe, can really be diminished. Again, Al Qaeda, ISIS, these terrorist groups that are being associated, that are representing the entire Muslim community. They're very, very small portions of the Muslim population. Um, it's This is obviously constituted a growing problem, not only in Europe but throughout the world. And I'm just glad I was able to kind of choose this topic and not only voice some of the opinions I have on it, but just the facts and what's truly wrong with how the Muslim community is being presented in the media.